Welcome to CounterPunch Radio. I am your program producer, Nathaniel St. Clair, and today we have a very important episode. In fact, this is the third time that we have aired it in the past year. Now, despite that, there is a good chance you haven't heard it, because our hosting site has deleted those episodes without any notification. If you're wondering why, well, you'll have to listen and decide for yourself. They have never given us a reason. The episode is a fantastic interview between Eric Draitser and the intrepid journalist Arun Gupta about the onset of genocide in Gaza. They talk about how it's different from past genocides, the history of Palestinian oppression, and why some say that Israel lost the moment that it started dropping bombs. Before we dive in, I want to highlight a broader context. The fact that we have to play a game of whack-a-mole with our hosting platform just so you might be able to listen to this episode really underscores how CounterPunch is unwilling to toe the mainstream line on anything, but especially on genocide. And as you probably know, it is our annual fundraiser. If you're a longtime counterpuncher, you know how crucial this month is for us. It's simple. We either hit our goal or we have to make deep cuts to a skeleton crew. It really is a make-or-break fundraiser for CounterPunch every year. But, fortunately, you have kept us kicking or punching for 30 years now. 3 decades. And we're ready to keep in the fight for a 31st round. Now, more than ever, it is vital to support unflinching independent journalism that is willing to continue telling the truth, regardless of how many roadblocks they put in our way. On that note, I want to spotlight a book that ties directly into today's discussion, titled Visualizing Palestine, A Chronicle of Colonialism and the Struggle for Liberation, published by the indispensable Haymarket Books. It is a striking collection of more than 200 full-color infographics offering a vivid portrait of Israeli settler colonialism and Palestinian struggle for freedom. As Nora Erakat puts it, Visualizing Palestine has captured nearly a century of Palestinian knowledge production and a series of striking visuals to further emphasize just how uncomplicated oppression is. The only controversy is whether this oppression should be accepted. You can find Visualizing Palestine at haymarketbooks.org, where all hardcover books are 10% off every day. All right, let's get to what you came here for. The third airing of the interview that the podcasting powers that be don't want you to hear. Eric Draitser in conversation with Arun Gupta.
Hello and welcome to CounterPunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitser. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First-time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Been a little while since I sat down for one of these recordings. So glad to be back in the chair. So glad to encourage you to go over to CounterPunch and get a subscription to CounterPunch Plus. That is how you support CounterPunch. We've been around for many, many years. In fact, over 30. And we've been providing all sorts of perspectives from the left on all of the issues over the last 30 years, going back to the wars in the Balkans, all the way through the horrible Bush years and the disastrous Obama years and the apocalyptic Trump years and the Biden end days. And I'm struggling for what the next progression of this metaphor would be. But here we are. CounterPunch is still here. Counterpunch.org is the website. CounterPunch Plus is the subscription. You'll have access to exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. Columnists that you're not going to find writing their columns anywhere else, as well as, of course, all of the free content available every single day. That is provided to a large degree by those subscriptions as well. Go over to the website, do the thing. Appreciate that. And of course, CounterPunch is always a platform for our friends, for those journalists that we respect, those voices whose analysis we always turn to. One of them is with me today, and I really do mean that. This is one of the people that I really do look to for analysis going back years now. At this point, Arun Gupta is back with us on the show. Arun's been on, a dozen times, maybe less, but a lot. Arun is, I would say, one of the preeminent journalists in the United States. I would argued that vociferously. You can find him on Twitter at Arun Indy. Even more important than Elon Musk's promotion, you can find Arun's writing in his food column for Dissent. That is the column called Apocalypse Chow. That's also the title of his forthcoming book. Arun is also on Substack, arunnews.substack.com. I think I got all the plugs there. Arun, welcome back.
Thanks so much. And you're, I think, one of the best journalists around today as well, Eric. And I'm not just saying that because you pay me $0 to come on every time.
And I will pay you not a dollar more. All right, Arun, let's talk about all of the crazy shit going on now. It's been a little while since we did a podcast together. So certainly our political thinking has been dominated to a large degree by the situation in Gaza over the last 3 months or so. So I guess I'm just going to open it up at a very general level, Arun, and just ask you, what are your overall perspectives on this horrific, I guess you could call it a war, massacre that's been unfolding in Gaza over these last 10, 12 weeks?
So I think people really need to think about the fact humanity has never seen anything like this before. Obviously, there have been a lot of horrific genocides throughout history. That is inherent to, it is a feature of Western colonialism, starting with the genocides of Christopher Columbus in the throughout the Americas and continuing in Africa and Asia, but especially with the development of industrial warfare. The 20th century was really the century of genocides. So, unfortunately, as horrifying as what is going on in Gaza, it's not new in that regard. But what makes it utterly different is just the insane speed and scale with which it is happening, and the fact that we are watching it second by second. Those of us who can stand to watch it, it's all over social media, even though the reporting, I think the corporate media reporting is almost just universally atrocious. And we can see actually, how genocides take place is that all these like good and enlightened and liberal, open-minded reporters are complicit in the genocide throughout the corporate media. And I'll say personally, I have mentored and helped give a start to numerous journalists who are now at the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, and all these other big media outlets who are working for outlets that are completely complicit in genocide, some of whom reporting is apologia for genocide. So, but to understand what's going on, let me give a few examples. First of all, very early on in this genocide, right? This is not a war against Hamas. There was a really very important article in November in 972 called I think it's the Assassination Factory, where it's talking about this AI program called Gospel. Is that not Orwellian, that Israel uses, where Gaza is the most surveilled place on the planet. Israel is probably the second strongest military in the world after the United States, and it's probably the most capable military in the world because it uses Gaza as its laboratory. There's a book that came out a few years ago that is getting a lot of attention now about how literally the Palestinians are guinea pigs for Israeli weapons, surveillance, AI, that they then develop all these murderous weapons and go to arms show and sell them, and they advertise them as, oh, these are battle tested, and what they mean, they've used them to massacre civilians. So this article in 972, you should look it up. What it talks about is that Israel knows exactly what it's doing, and that it is blowing up all these civilian buildings to put pressure on Hamas, right? If that is not the definition of terrorism, then it has no meaning. That what they're trying to do is to mass murder thousands and thousands of people, so that the rest of society rebels and say, please stop this war to Hamas. Of course, that's not what's working at all. I think there is a lot of anger against Hamas, but there was also a poll taken during the 1 week long ceasefire that showed 57% of Gazans still supported the October 7th attacks, and something like a staggering, I think, 82% or 85% of Palestinians in the West Bank supported the October 7th attacks. And that if there was an election to be held, Hamas would probably win. Certainly, they would win in the West Bank. The only one who might give them a run for the money is Marwan Barghouti, the great political strategist who Israel has kept locked up for decades on bogus terrorism charges. And, when people say, like, oh, where's the Palestinian, Nelson Mandela or, Martin Luther King? Well, they're either dead or in jail. That's where they are, like Marwan Barghouti. So in any case, what we're seeing is the systematic murder of an entire society. So 1 month into the war, Israel had already destroyed more homes, a greater proportion of homes in all of Gaza than the US and Britain did during 4 years of bombing Germany. Just think about that for a second, right? That like for night after night, especially as the war dragged on in 43, 44, 45, they're just sending these waves of hundreds of bombers over German cities, and it ends or it peaks with carpet bombing of places like Hamburg and Dresden. And again, it's the same exact thing that's going on in Gaza now, where it was to break the will of the civilian population. And it didn't work then, and it's not working now. The irony of this is, of course, last year, the Western media were full of just all this rage and just indignation about how Russia was attacking Ukraine's infrastructure and they're attacking their civilians and all these articles. They will not break the will of the civilian population. That never works. And now suddenly this is forgotten when it's being done to the Gazans. But the destruction of the housing, and there's actually a word for this, it's called domicide, right? The destruction of people's domiciles is just one aspect of this war. They're killing the poets. They're killing the writers. Israel's killing musicians, artists. They're destroying libraries, colleges. They've completely decimated the health infrastructure. They bombed hundreds of mosques and churches, including I believe it's some 12th century historic mosques. They're destroying all the intellectual cultural, archaeological knowledge. They're poisoning the land. They're poisoning the aquifer with salt water, right? This idea of flooding the tunnels. There are even Israelis who are saying this isn't going to work, and all it's going to do is poison the aquifer for decades. And you could just keep going on, and of course it's there's certainly the genocide of human beings, right? We have this genocide of bombs. It's now we're now at the stage of genocide by bacteria, and we're getting reports of a genocide of bullets, right? That the UN came out and said that there's credibility to these allegations that Palestinian men are being rounded up and executed. And we've all seen these horrifying photos of stripped and naked Palestinian men, some of whom are being forced to be actors in just these appalling propaganda videos carrying around rifles. There was that one everyone mocked because it showed the same guy. In one shot, he's carrying a rifle in his right hand above his head. In the next shot, he's carrying the rifle in his left hand above his head, clearly staged. changed. So what we have never seen anything like this before in the human story, where you can go and watch second by second the systematic murder of an entire society. And we have this special UN rapporteur for Palestine saying they fear that there's a new Nakba underway, that Palestinians are going to be ethnically cleansed from Gaza. And we saw that report. And when of the homes planned to build homes for Israelis, and I saw it, I didn't even believe it was real. And then it came out it's real, that some firm has drafted these architectural plans to build homes on the seaside in Gaza. And so this is nothing less than a genocide. Anyone who denies it is a genocide denialist. They are no better than a Holocaust denialist. And just and let's also stick that knife in there and twist it a little bit, because let's not forget that Benjamin Netanyahu is a Holocaust denialist. He was called out by Israeli reporters a year or so ago when he said the idea for the Holocaust was purely by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who is kind of this trans-historical boogeyman in the Zionist Hasbara propaganda, that the Nazis completely got the idea from the Grand Mufti. And if you believe that, that makes you a Holocaust denialist, because it completely erases all the Nazi plans, ideology, and basically the systematic slaughter of Jews that they carried out over a decade during the Holocaust.
I want to shift gears just a little bit. I mean, I certainly agree with all of those statements, but I want to just ask you, what do you think of the idea that, well, you and I had discussed this when this war first began, over dinner one night, when I said that, you know, it was my opinion that Israel lost the war the minute they invaded after October 7th. And it's been borne out now if you read the analyses and the coming out of the intelligence circles and military types in Washington, etc. Many are talking about this now, that this is unwinnable, that the Israelis have put themselves in a situation where their declared aim of eliminating Hamas is simply impossible. And so I want to just ask you, A, do you think Israel lost this war from day one? And B, where can Israel go from here, if anywhere?
I mean, obviously, crystal ball questions are hard to answer. I mean, I think what we're talking about is kind of a historical dynamic, and I would agree that Israel has lost kind of the historical war, but at the same time, efforts to wipe out a people, exterminate a people, are often successful. And I was over the summer in Istanbul, and everyone's familiar with the Armenian genocide. And when I was over there, it's you start to realize, oh, there was also an Assyrian genocide. There was extermination of the Greek population in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, and there's some people do talk about that. And while I was there, I started to realize, wait a minute, Turkey is right next door to Africa, and I'm like, there are no black people here. And it's just like, there would have had to have been lots and lots of black people in Turkey, given that it was just like a short sail away from places like Egypt, which is part of Africa. And so, what happened to all the black people? Well, clearly they were exterminated, and no one even talks about that anymore, right? So, I don't want to say that Israel might be successful. We don't know that, as horrifying as it is in terms of, what's going on in both Gaza and the West Bank, and let's just say what's going on in Palestine. Really, really what we're seeing is one country with war against two large Bantu stands that it's segregated millions of people. At this point, I think the death toll in the West Bank is approaching about 50% of the death toll of Israeli civilians on October 7th. As of now, 695 Israeli civilians were killed on October 7th, 71 foreign residents, and the rest were police, military, border security, total of 1,139 casual deaths that we know of. So, will will Israel succeed? Possibly, but then it gets at, this is why I say dynamic. It gets at what cost. I don't think Israel has ever been more isolated in the world, at least in the last 50 years or so. Certainly we see these completely bankrupt, venal, brutal Arab regimes that are willing to make common cause with Israel, but they're going to have to keep their distance for a long, long time because of the anger that is now being directed at Israel over committing genocide against a huge Arab population. Um, I think that, October 7th, though, really did change the game. And, this gets at a different question, the condemnation of Hamas. Like, look, what happened on October 7th was ugly. It was horrific. There were all sorts of atrocities committed. But honestly, at the same time, it's just like, okay, Israel experienced for one day what it has done on and off to Palestine for 100 years. And as terrible as it is, it's to not expect that this was going to happen one day, I think is absurd. Just like to not expect that 9/11, to act like 9/11 came out of nowhere. But October 7th showed, I think what it did is it demolished the idea of Israel is this safe haven for Jews. I think it's very important to say this, and I think it's very important for everyone to say this, especially socialists, internationalists, those who fundamentally believe in liberation and self determination for all people, that Israel has nothing to do with Judaism. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It is about as representative for Judaism as the Taliban is for Islam. Zionism is nothing more than a murderous colonialist ideology. And we should remember every colonial regime shrouds itself in religion. That does not make the religion that is cynically exploited wrong. It makes the colonial regime wrong, right? Australia, South Africa, the US, of course, Manifest Destiny, right? All these colonial regimes shroud themselves in religion. And Israel is nothing but a colonial state that was set up by the British. Um, so we need to reject this idea because Israel keeps mobilizing it. And the irony of it is there is no more dangerous place in the world for Jews than Israel. I don't know what the exact number is. A friend of mine who's an anti-Zionist Jew told me this, but he said 20,000 Jews have been killed in Israel since its founding in 1948. He says it's the most dangerous world and the place for Jews. So I'll take his word on that. And so that's why I think, yes, one can make an argument that Israel has lost the war. It's lost kind of the or it's lost what I'd say is the psycho-historical war. Whether it can still create facts on the ground for massive ethnic cleansing and extermination remains to be seen. But the final thing we should remember is colonialism's never stop never stop the warfare, never stop ethnic cleansing. For one, the Zionists believe that it's both sides of the Jordan River. That's what it is in the Old Testament, belong to the Jews. There's also the Greater Israel that some of them actually have maps, that extend into Syria and Lebanon and Egypt, and Iraq. And part of the absurdity now of like the ruling class and their barking dogs in the media getting all outraged of the slogan "from the river to the sea" is that is the Likud slogan, the ruling party in Israel, and they are the ones who are carrying out this genocide from the river to the sea. So this war is never going to end. What needs to end is the Zionist colonialism.
So there's two things that I think need to be sort of in some ways separated and in some ways combined, and that is that the question of Israel, that is the state of Israel, the Zionist project, and all the different things that are tied up with that. And separate from that is the current government of Israel, Netanyahu, the far right coalition that he heads, etc. And they're not necessarily exactly the same, right? So one could say, as you note, that Israel, quote unquote, could win, quote unquote, exterminate the Palestinians, drive them out of Gaza, turn Gaza into, prime real estate and what have you, that the state of Israel might ultimately be able to do that, but Netanyahu himself and his government might not survive it. It seems like there are a number of political forces that are working against Netanyahu at this time, including what seems like the disastrous response to October 7th itself. So, what do you make of the position of the Israeli government, given everything that's happened in the last 10 weeks, and the future for Netanyahu, the war criminal?
I mean, I only know what I read in the Israeli press, right? Haaretz, Times of Israel, outlets like that, and I do read them every day. And there does seem the conventional wisdom is Netanyahu is toast, that he's gone. Um, uh, it's and that he's just trying to drag out this war as long as possible, because that is what allows him to stay in power. That seems to be, I think, a reasonable assessment. I don't think he has a long term future. What we know about October 7th is, and it's pretty clear, it surprised everyone, including Hamas. They had no expectation that they were going to be, from their perspective, I'm not endorsing this, so wildly successful in terms of the attack. They sent a very small force through, 150 fighters. It was then followed by up to 3,000 Palestinians, apparently, who went through, many of them armed, but many were just going around looting and grabbing whatever they could, which is not too surprising given the state of destitution in under Israel's illegal blockade. Um, so the reason that it surprised everyone is we now know that basically Gaza was left completely unguarded. Again, I'm not like I'm endorsing that. The whole wall there is completely illegal. But from Israel's military perspective, they had transferred all the active duty troops to the West Bank, so they could accompany Ben Gvir, this basically fascist. I'm trying to remember, there was this genocide and Holocaust scholar who was on Democracy Now! Who called it Ben Gvir a Nazi. Um, a Jewish Holocaust scholar, one of the most prominent in the world. These are the Kahanists who are basically Nazis. They want to engage in a mass extermination of the Palestinians. Their hero is Baruch Goldstein, the first suicide bomber who killed, what was it, 29 Palestinians on the Temple Mount about 30 years ago. Um, So in any case, they had transferred all the troops to protect Ben Gvir and these fascist settlers while they were going on rampages in the West Bank to seize more land. And so when Hamas disabled parts of the border fence, there was no one to stop them from pouring through. And the Israeli public knows this very well. And also, the Israeli public. It's there is among the Zionist faction section of the Israeli public, there is what seems to be overwhelming support for the genocide of the Palestinians. But there's anger, huge anger about October 7th, and there's also huge anger about the fact it's clear that Netanyahu's government doesn't care about the hostages. And in fact, I think they would rather that they were just all killed, so they weren't an impediment to continuing with this war of extermination. Um, and so it's even more appalling to see genocide Joe Biden like embracing Netanyahu. And let's not forget there was this whole year of these like brutal attacks, and even the mainstream media was forced to start using terms like ethnic cleansing and Jewish supremacy in talking about what was going on in the West Bank and Jerusalem, which is just hints at how horrifyingly fascistic Israel had become. And the final point I want to make is like, look, Israel is an apartheid regime. It's been obvious for a long time. I mean, I remember way back when in the late '80s. Um, uh, Damn, I'm forgetting the publisher of Tikkun, Michael. You know who I'm talking about, right? Um, um, he said anyone calling, and Tikkun is supposed to be this progressive, spiritual Jewish new magazine. Um, he said anyone calling Israel an apartheid state is anti-Semitic, right? Basically, now everyone agrees that Israel is an apartheid. Michael Lerner, that's who it uh, is an apartheid state. Amnesty International, which is a very, I think, problematic human rights organization. They're very slow to challenge empire. Came out with that report saying Israel is an apartheid state. Michael Lerner, the publisher of Tikkun, like around 1990, he said anyone calling Israel an apartheid state is anti-Semitic. Now there's widespread recognition that Israel is an apartheid state. I think 15, 20 years ago, Bishop Desmond Tutu went to Israel and said it's worse than South Africa was. It is absolutely an apartheid state. Amnesty International, which is very slow to take on empire, had this groundbreaking report saying it's an apartheid state. Jimmy Carter wrote a book. The news media has been filled with stuff about Jimmy Carter because Rosalind Carter died, but none of them never seemed to mention that he wrote this book calling Israel an apartheid state. And every apartheid state will inevitably, given enough time, veer towards fascism and genocide, because the essence of an apartheid state is the your victim, the group that you are subjugating, is seen as inherently lesser in every way, socially, culturally, biologically, spiritually, that they are a lesser form of humans. That's why you have the right, the God given right, to subjugate them. And there is no kinder, gentler form of Zionism. And this is one of the things I do see right now that I think is troubling, and that a lot of progressives and leftists really need to come to grips with. That I see among a lot of friends who are otherwise have really good politics, still want to cling to some notion that Israel has a role to play, and it doesn't. It does not have any role to play whatsoever. And so, when we see, like, I have a friend who was upset about the slogan "From the river to the sea" because he felt that, that's essentially it excludes Jews, and that's not true. It's no more true than a free South Africa was going to exclude white South Africans. The whole point of "From the River to the Sea" is Palestine should be an actual democracy, a free, secular, democratic state for all peoples, for all faiths. The same Holocaust scholar who I was talking about, who is on Democracy Now, he was suggesting that there it should be some sort of confederation between Israel and Palestine, and that Palestinians who want to Israelis who want to stay in Palestine and the settlements should be able to do so, but they would be subject to Palestinian law and vice versa. And I'm like, okay, that would be an improvement, but what about the 2 million Israeli Arabs who would still be subjugated to a Jewish supremacist state? Because Israel is set up inherently as an apartheid state. So it still doesn't solve that problem. It just kicks the can down the road in that regard.
Absolutely correct. In the time that we have remaining, I want to touch on a couple of other things, and then I do want to get off of the Gaza Palestine issue and touch on the monster who has left this mortal coil recently. But before we do that, let's talk about one of the threads of this broader Gaza war story that has really been particularly well problematic, but also effective, and that is the issue of sexual violence against white women, Israeli white women. The portrayal of sexual violence, the role that the propaganda surrounding sexual violence has played in popularizing certain narratives or propagandizing certain ideas. So I'm kind of keeping that general because I'm not sure how you might tackle this question. So I guess the question, Arun, is how do you read the media coverage of the alleged sexual violence that happened on October 7th? And what does that coverage tell us about the nature of this conflict and about the propaganda?
Yeah. So I have been following it extremely closely because I'm an investigative reporter, and something smelled rotten in the Israeli allegations because first they lie about everything. Right. Initially after October 7th, there were all these, 40 beheaded babies, 8 burnt babies, a fetus ripped out of a dead pregnant woman's stomach and stabbed, a baby put in an oven and burned. All of those were lies, and some of them were coming from high-ranking Israeli military officials. A colonel in the IDF said that he found 8 dead babies. There was one baby that was killed along with one of their parents. There was several children, teenagers and preteens who were killed. Obviously, all horrifying, all of that atrocities and unjustifiable. I think it might have been about. I think it's a total of 33 kids and teenagers who were killed. But none of these other things happened. And in the first days, there were these rape allegations as well being made. And what happened was the media then started retracting it because it turns out there are all these false stories that had to be retracted. So the LA Times and I believe NBC News or CBS both, they reported that rapes happened, and then they said actually there's no evidence. We don't have any independent confirmation that they happened. Okay, So then begins a new round of allegations, and there's this civil commission that was set up, and it's presented as somehow being independent, but it is actually, and I'm trying to figure out who exactly set it up. But the woman who is in charge of it, she did a bunch of interviews and took a central role in November. Kolkov Elkayam Levy, she gave this absolutely unhinged interview in Haaretz, this big profile of her, where she basically admits they don't have any evidence, but she's saying we don't need any evidence. She talks about going before this body known as UN Women, and she's outraged that they're asking her about rape kits, about evidence of semen in the corpses of the women, and she says we don't need to provide any evidence. We are respected women, and you should just believe us. I mean, it's crazy. And the interviewer, you could tell, is even kind of like, okay, this is really kind of weird. But El Kayem Levy, when she's asked about, she starts going on about journalists and how she refuses to answer any journalist questions. And she says, we're not going to put any witnesses forward because if something they say comes out incorrect, then everyone's going to leap all over them. And say like this is all fabricated. So the thing to understand about let me also put it in the context. Of course, rape could happen. It would be surprising if it didn't happen. But what is really appalling about these Israeli allegations is one, there's no hard evidence whatsoever. There's no survivor testimony. There's no forensic evidence, and there is no real photographic or video evidence, despite the Israeli police saying they have over 60,000 files, many of them from the Hamas militants who stormed Israel itself on October 7th. So there's no evidence, real evidence whatsoever. What Israel is doing is there's fabricating these allegations of mass rape, and they're weaponizing Me Too trauma, anti-Semitism, and the reality of sexual violence that does happen during wartime to undermine the UN agencies that deal with sexual violence, because they are really pissed that these agencies, and this interview is insane because she admits all this openly, because they're advocating for Palestinian women and girls who are currently being genocided in Gaza. That is what they're really pissed about. And El Kayem Levy says, like, the interviewer is like, so you're collecting testimony? And she's like, no, we're not. And it's just like, okay. And the interviewer is like, but you need testimony. And she's like, we don't need any testimony. And it's just like, it's just this bizarre circular logic. And you see the same exact logic now filter into the mainstream media, where they're bending over backwards. So there was this huge piece in the New York Times on December 28th, 2023. It was the top story about, screams without words, Hamas sexual violence on October 7th. And they just go through all these like acrobatics, intellectual gymnastics to justify why there is no evidence. They're like, oh, the victims were all killed, or they're going to take years to come forward, or they're too traumatized to talk. This is a load of BS, right? Because of course sexual violence is horrifying, but across the world, women come forward. I've been looking at reports from Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Ukraine, Bosnia, Afghanistan, some of the most inaccessible areas in the world, where women and some men are coming forward, dozens and hundreds who come forward and give these detailed testimonies to human rights investigators, explaining what happened to them. And the fact of the matter is, what this is also doing, it is erasing all the sexual violence that Israel is known for and notorious for, that it uses against Palestinian prisoners, including children. The State Department official who, you can Google it up, who resigned 2 months ago in protest, he talked about how they had verified a 13-year-old boy was raped in the Israeli prisons. They confronted Israel with this evidence. Israel went and shut down the group in the West Bank that did the investigation, seized all their records, and declared them a terrorist organization. We also have all these Palestinians who have been released since October 7th, who have been traumatized, who are humiliated, who have been severely abused and tortured, who are speaking openly about what they experienced. Many of them are alleging threats of rape and sexual violence and rape in the prisons. And some of them are saying things like, I wish I was dead. It would be better to be dead now. So are they lesser people, that they don't feel the trauma, and that that's why they can speak publicly? And so the fact of the matter, so Israel just plays this game where they're like, oh, all the victims were killed. Well, then how do you know they were victims if they were all killed? Or no, or then they'll be, well, the survivors won't talk, or we don't know of any survivors. Koka Velkayim Levy says that there may be no survivors. But then I've been gathering all these reports. Oh, one doctor claims there's 11 survivors. Oh, this person claims that 10 of the hostages have been abused. That's another thing. If so many of them were abused, how come not one hostage has come forward and spoken about this abuse? If they would have been the ones who would have been most likely to see this. So
Arun,
here,
I want to back up for just a second and just point out one other point that you were alluding to, but I think deserves to be teased out a little more. The Israelis, with regard to the rape allegations, as you noted, they've weaponized Me Too as a way of undermining sort of the UN institutions themselves. But they've
me too,
also,
unless you're a Jew. That's the actual hashtag slogan they created. I mean, it's so appalling. Me too, unless you're a Jew.
so there's that aspect of it. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also point out the fact, as Yoav Litvin said on this show several weeks ago, about the fact that it is at the core of Zionism and of contemporary Israel, it is white supremacy. And the idea of these brown-skinned Arabs rampaging through these lily white, settler neighborhoods and raping Jewish women, it plays into this very racialized trope as well, which is very much kind of the bedrock of Israeli propaganda.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to understand, because what we see, this is now even filtering into the left, that the left has generally been immune to Israeli propaganda, but now, so what Israel is relying on is that rape denialism is all too real. That so many women are basically, they don't come forward when they're sexually assaulted or raped, because they think. They feel they can't deal with being re-traumatized, or even if they can, no one's going to believe them. It's going to be denied, and this happens on a mass scale. Rape denialism during war. And so, what is going on now is, I think, a lot of feminists, white feminists in particular, are kind of succumbing to what is a psychological strategy on the Israeli part to manipulate the all too real phenomena of rape denialism that's going on. But so Katha Pollitt in The Nation had a big column, like, denouncing the left and feminist organizations for not believing the allegations. Jill Filipovich, the prominent feminist and lawyer, had a huge piece in the New York Times. The Democracy Now! they amplified the allegations in one of their headlines a few weeks ago without any kind of pushback on it. You do have various feminist organizations, National Organization of Women, Planned Parenthood, the organization that the artist V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, set up, author of the Vagina Monologues, who've all come out with statements, criticizing allegations of sexual violence on October 7th. But what is really appalling is by putting forward these completely. So let me explain. Because there is no hard evidence, this is what the evidence amounts to. There are a few different categories. One is video evidence. There's this website that was set up by the Israeli government, Hamas-massacre.net. So it collects all these videos, claiming in different categories, and one of the videos is mass rapes, and that's what I'm debunking in particular: mass rapes, because part of the game is that, like, it'll suddenly be about rapes, but then it'll start to shift to sexual violence and gender oppression. And so, if you can show gender oppression, which starts to basically veer into like tone policing, it's so vague and ambiguous. Then it does this kind of recursive aspect, like, oh, see, we said it existed, and so then people think, well, rape existed because we can show like a little incident of gender oppression. So the evidence falls into a few categories. One is videos. There are a dozen videos. They're basically all bogus. It's anonymous people, or it's very vague accounts, or it's fantastical accounts. So the New York Times story goes to great lengths about some alleged incident that happened during the Supernova music festival. And look, I have covered reported from a lot of situations that were extremely charged and traumatic. This includes I stood on my rooftop and watched people jump from the Twin Towers on 9/11, and I was reporting. I was publishing a newspaper, The Independent, at that time, so I was seeing exactly what was going on. People would make up wild stories because, and I don't even, and even when it comes to the IDF military, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, like, look, they're not lying. What it is they're so traumatized and so unable to process what they just witnessed. What people do is they invent stories to try to process their trauma, to try to like come to grips with these unbearable atrocities that they've witnessed, right? So I saw this stuff happen during the Bundy occupation in Eastern Oregon. That's when the Mormon Bundy brothers, I was out there for the last week, took over the wildlife refuge. I saw Lavoy Finicum 2 hours before he was killed. People there were inventing stories. The summer of 2020 in Portland, with the mass protests and the massive police violence, where they injured 6,000 residents. Really, that's a story that's never really been properly told. Again, people are so traumatized, they invent stories. So I don't have any doubt. And so I'm not casting any ill will that people are inventing stories because they're so traumatized, they're so confused as to what's happening, that they're psychologically trying to come to grips with it. So that's the background. This woman, we first hear of her from this video from the Israeli police. Her face is blurred out. She's just called Witness S, and his stuff is going to get really graphic. I'll try and keep things to a minimum. She claimed that she watched this woman being gang raped. She saw this woman who was partly naked and bent over and being passed from one Hamas fighter to another. Then one Hamas fighter, and here's where it just starts to go off the rails, cut off her breasts and threw them in the street, and another Hamas fighter was playing with the severed breast. Mind you, this is an active battleground, right? This is not like what we see in a lot of conflicts where the military has the invading forces defeated the opposing side, and so they're free to rampage. This is a extremely hot war. We know that Israel is also, we know for a fact Israel is firing and killing its own civilians. The New York Times admitted this outright. Apache helicopters, tanks, etc. So she's claiming this woman's breasts are cut off, that the Hamas fighter who is raping her, he shoots her. First of all, while he's still inside her, and I'm like, how does that even work? We see the Hamas fighters with AK-47s. That's pretty much impossible to do that. Okay, let's assume he has a handgun and he shoots her, and then she says, and I'm not joking, and then he ejaculates inside her, and I'm like, how close are you that you could even see this? And how does that work? When you shoot someone, they fall dead, and there's a recoil that would push you backward. And it gets worse or better or more crazy. She claims Hamas fighters are walking around with severed heads as trophies. And this is from a tweet. I haven't been able to find the whole video. If anyone can find it and send me a link, I want to see it. The Hamas fighters are walking around with severed heads, and quote, there wasn't a thing they didn't do to them. So I'm allowed to cuss, right?
Yeah, of course.
He's basically claiming they're skull fucking heads. That they're going David Cameron with the, pig head in the middle of a hot battlefield. And so this is not believable. This is someone who's seeking attention, who's trying to please the interviewers, who has been traumatized, who may already be unhinged, who
I
doesn't.
feel like the idea of shooting somebody that you're literally in the middle of having sex with is the kind of thing that would be said by someone who's never had sex.
Right. Well,
Like, how could that even be? Like, what logistically? That just can't even be.
so feminists like Katha Pollitt, white feminists, and I say they are right now, they are sitting at the intersection where Orientalism meets birth of a nation. They are saying things like, and Jill Filipovic does the same exact thing. Like, these articles are like if they were written by Chat GPT. It's like you're saying, like, Chat GPT, give me a Hasbara justification that mass rape happened on October 7th. And
Well,
what they're saying is, and this gets back to the denunciations of Hamas. I refuse to play that game, because they're saying, well, at the end of both of their articles, they're like, well, we know Hamas are savages and barbarians, so isn't it believable that they could have done this? And so that gets back, yes, this is like pure Orientalism. Meanwhile, oh, what about the Israeli savagery, right? After October 7th, they kidnapped 3,000 Palestinian men who had the misfortune of being trapped in Israel. These were Gazan workers who were caught in Israel. Numerous, huge amounts of reporting on the brutality, where we have names, specificity, that they were being tortured, they were being abused, some were killed. And Israel has rounded up thousands of other Palestinians since October 7th. All the Palestinians who were freed in the hostage exchange, very specific allegations of abuse, torture, people being killed, and sexual abuse. Meanwhile, we're not hearing a word of this in the corporate media. They're all focusing on this fabrication. So let me just get back to the point about the evidence. So one is this really just nothing burger videos. You can go watch them yourself. They are just, at most, they're anonymous allegations. Often they're incredibly vague. Like, oh, there was like blood on genitalia. It's just like, yeah, it's a war zone. Like, you can Google up pictures where it shows rows of corpses of Israelis. Guess what? They all have bloody underwear, because when you're shot and you're pumping out all this blood is going everywhere. All the clothing is bloody. So you see all these things about bloody underwear, right? Then you see, like, there's certain videos that are shown again and again and again. There's one of 19-year-old Nama Levy. This became famous. It's the girl who is taken from the back of a Jeep, and she's put inside the Jeep, and this happens in Gaza. And I've watched this video probably 30 times. And the fighter takes her, the back of the Jeep is open. He takes 15 seconds to move her from the back and stuff her inside. Someone in Gaza is filming this, and it's a high quality video because you can see she's bleeding from her arm, she's bleeding from her ankles. There's some blood on her sweatpants, on the knees, and there's a large stain on the back of her sweatpants. Numerous outlets have said this is a blood stain. There are all these Israeli sites that say it's a blood stain or that she was gushing blood between her legs. That's another one of the tropes we hear again. Israeli women gushing blood. There is no, you can see her clearly. There's no blood gushing from her legs. The stain on the back of her pants is a big brown stain. Gee, and what is that? Maybe it's mud. It's probably she's so frightened she defecated herself. And there is in fact an CNN report, one which a print story that claims it's a blood stain, but then there's a video report that actually shows the video of her being moved, and she's moved in 15 seconds, right? So it's like calling this paraded. It's just like, that's what I'm like. It starts to enter tone policing, like, oh, you're sexist because of the tone you spoke with me. Okay, call it parading. Then what are we going to call those hundreds of Palestinian men who are literally being paraded and being made to play actors in Israeli propaganda films? So this CNN report that shows the actual video, it doesn't say anything about blood on her sweatpants because clearly it's not blood. It uses it as an example of gender violence because she's being paraded. Another one is Shani Look, the tattoo artist, the Israeli German. She's in the back of a Jeep. She's partially unclothed. It just looks like she has underwear and a bra on. She was already dead. A piece of the base of her skull was found at the Supernova rave massacre, which means that is not a wound anyone is going to survive if a piece from the base of your skull is gone. So, but that's often used as evidence, like, oh, she's about to be raped. She's already dead, and we also see this, oh, necrophilia. Another category is second and third hand eyewitness. These volunteers from these groups that collect the remain. One prominent group is Zaka. There's one guy in particular, Yossi Landau. Again, he's in the New York Times article. The New York Times never bothers to tell its reader the fact. Let me see. So he says he discovered a pregnant woman who had been murdered in Kibbutz Be'eri. Quote, choking up, Landau says, quote, her stomach was butchered open. The baby that was connected to the cord was stabbed. That is a complete lie. Yet the New York Times is using him as somehow he's a credible source. Sherry Mendez, she's been everywhere. Just dozens and dozens of profiles of her. She's also in the latest Times report. She had also told I'm trying to remember. It was a British paper that it might be the Times of London, but I'm not sure. That she also repeated the stabbed fetus, right? So these are lies, and it's just like, if you're out there promoting lies, right, and then you are offering yourself as secondhand expert. None of them are forensic experts. Zaka volunteers were telling so many lies to the media. Zaka actually issued a statement saying our volunteers have no expertise in forensic evidence, and basically, like, they're basically saying don't believe what our volunteers are saying. The New York Times doesn't see fit to report any of this whatsoever. So it's basically these three categories: videos alleged eyewitnesses and then secondhand reports from people who came across corpses. Like there's a music promoter who's often misidentified as the promoter for the Supernova rave. He's actually CEO of a different music promotion company. He helped search bodies the next day, and he's saying, "Oh, he saw some that were like nude and didn't have clothing on." There's there's almost no video of this once whatsoever. And I'll say the final thing because I've been, like I said, I've been tracking this extremely closely. The New York Times story starts out just is so like maudlin and weepy about this woman, and it's horrifying. Who she's killed, her corpse is lying on the ground. You see this video of her; she is completely naked from the waist down, and the video's of poor quality. And then you see the video pans to her head. And the New York Times misrepresents this video. She says her hand is covering her eyes. And it's just like, that's not really what's going on. Her arm is sticking at an angle in the air because she has been baked. Her head, the flesh on her head is pulling away from her teeth. It's blackened. All the hair on her head is gone. And in fact, you can see white on the top of her head, which appears to indicate that the flesh was her head was burned down to the skull. And it's just like, oh gee, is it any surprise? And she has no hair whatsoever. Is it any surprise then that maybe a bunch of her clothes were burnt off? And this is one of their primary sources of evidence. And this is what the media has become. They are no better than 9/11 conspiracy theorists who would pore over videos for hours saying, here's the proof that 9/11 was an inside job. Or they sound like QAnon conspiracists who are like poring over election footage saying, here's the proof on how the election was stolen. And we expect this from lunatics on the internet, but now the media are doing the same exact thing. And it's just like, and I will repeat, yes, of course, it is entirely possible. Rape did happen. And I want to keep the emphasis on rape because this is part of what I'm saying is this conflation: rape, sexual violence, gender oppression. Because you'll see stuff like, oh, a body was found with like all these nails in it in rubble. And it's just like in the thighs and the vagina, or like two soldiers were shot in the vagina. It's just like, people get shot everywhere. And I have seen photos of Israeli women you can see like a string of bullets holes along their thigh. It's just like, it's a war. People get shot everywhere. Is that like surprising? You know, so it's just taking all these little bits of circumstantial evidence and it keeps repeating them. And everything in that New York Times report is completely old. There's only one thing that is new, which is some account of claiming there was a gang rape that happened with a woman and a van of fighters, and it's just like, I'm sorry, there's been so much fabricated eyewitness testimony that to rely purely on eyewitness testimony is just not credible.
And just to finish up this point, I didn't know that we would do a 30-minute rape segment in this podcast, but here we are. To finish up this issue, I think you're pointing at the real crux of this at the beginning of your comments, Arun, where you pointed out that it is white liberal women in particular that are targeted by this. And liberal is really what we're focused on here, because I was thinking all throughout this period while you were making those comments, but also in the reporting that I've read as well, I keep thinking back to the reports of Gaddafi's soldiers raping Libyans, and that being one of the real sort of piercing, propaganda points that made it through in 2011 to kind of justify NATO's intervention, the R2P responsibility to protect doctrine, right? This is a very liberal form of war making and imperialism. And in this case, in the case of Israel's sort of weaponization of this narrative, it seems to be, again, to kind of disarm what is sort of the anticipated liberal opposition to Israel's policies.
Yeah. I mean, Amanda Weiss had a piece where they argued that the goal here is to prevent just continue this narrative that the Palestinians are such utter savages that it enables the genocide, right? And that's what Hasbara really is about. Like, Israel is in many ways very sophisticated. They understand the information warfare is essential to actual warfare itself. It gives them more space to continue with this horrific war, and that's what's going on, right? That they're trying to create the space where they can continue to with this genocide of the Palestinians, and I think they do want to. They want to get away with forcing the 2 million Gazan Palestinians out of Gaza, but that's just not going to happen overnight. And, Egypt's not going to make it easy. But the longer and longer that they do it, the greater the chance that they can just force this mass exodus of those who are still alive into the Sinai. And so, but what's really appalling is, like, I heard from a prominent left journalist who said, like, he told me, well, the allegations are not all entirely false. And it's just like, look, I will just keep repeating it. Yes, of course, it is possible it could have happened, but we need some sort of evidence. And in fact, what we hear from Israeli officials is the exact opposite. There are no survivors. We're not going to give you any evidence. You need to believe what we say. Otherwise, you're an anti Semite and a rape denialist, and you're with Hamas. I mean, it's just so ridiculously absurd that this game that they're playing. And I also want to emphasize, but what is really appalling is it took decades to get world bodies to recognize that rape is one of the primary weapons of war. And the fact of the matter is, this is going to be like the Al Shifa hospital, because Israel is not going to, it has not provided any evidence, meaning there is unlikely to be any significant evidence. Maybe it'll come out there's some isolated cases of rape that did occur. And so while the rest of the West moves on, and of course, we'll see the New York Times and Washington Post, 4 paragraph articles a year or two from now saying that UN bodies did not find any credible evidence of the mass rape allegations. The rest of the world is going to remember this, and what is also going to happen is all these um, kind of non-state actors and brutal governments will then weaponize that. And they will use rape as a weapon in conflicts, and then when they're called out on it, they'll say, oh, well, it's a lie, just like Israel lied about mass rape allegations. And that is what is really distressing about these
Exactly.
white feminists who are joining in on this. The damage they are actually doing to feminism, the erasure of the genocide against Palestinian women and girls. And go read this Haaretz story. It's crazy because she lays out what the whole political strategy is. Oh, and I should also point out, El Kayem Levy, she's presenting herself as this like expert in gender and humanitarian law. What she's most well known for, in 2015, she wrote this 40-page paper in the Harvard International Law Review, coming up with tortured justifications to torture Palestinian prisoners who are on hunger strike by force feeding them. Right? That's what she's best known for. That how to like force feed Palestinians who are going on hunger strike as a political protest. And she's going through all the laws, to try and find a way around it. And the same year that this article comes out, Israel adopts force feeding of Palestinian prisoners as a policy. It's not clear that they've carried it out, but this shows who she really is. And she's also founded some institute, I think it's the Dova Institute, that basically overlaps with Netanyahu's National Security Council. Like there are three members on her institute who are also on Netanyahu's National Security Council, and she's a former. She formerly served in the spokesperson unit in the IDF, right? So what her
No
real
conflict of interest there. None.
and when it comes to her accomplishments, again in this Haaretz profile, her accomplishments, she played a key role in getting so this woman who was the director of the Sexual Assault Center at the University of Alberta signed a letter that says the allegations of rape are unverified on October 7th. Right? Nothing controversial there. But El Qayyum Levy played a role in getting her fired from that job. And then she said, we're going after this Jordanian Palestinian rapporteur at the UN next. So that's what her real role is. It's Hasbara and cancel culture to silence
Hmm.
female critics who are saying you are not presenting any evidence. It's appalling.
Appalling is an appalling understatement to be sure. I want to ask you, I want to spend the next 45 minutes talking to you about Biden and the horrible, disastrous policy that the Biden administration has pursued, and how the door is wide open for Il Duce himself to make his return as well, swinging to even to the right of Biden on Israel, while also awkwardly parading to the left of Biden on Ukraine. Very interesting. But we are out of time talking about all of that, because I did say I would devote at least 7 minutes at the very end of our conversation to talking a little bit about the not so dearly departed Mr. Henry Kissinger. So Arun Gupta, go right at it and tell us, what do you think about this fucking demon?
Well, I'm very pleased that you had me here from. Talking to you, Eric, from beyond the afterlife. I feel like I died at too young an age. I had so much to give to humanity. It was my time here was brief, but my gifts will continue to outlive me. Um,
That's a pretty good Kissinger. I'd say it's pretty good. I
So I,
like that.
I don't need to say anything more about Kissinger, but I think there was actually a really big part, and I think in a really encouraging part of the story that the left missed, and that the left is too bleak. And that's a fact. Is like, look, Kissinger committed all these atrocities, right? He played a direct role in the three most horrific genocides of the 1970s. Obviously, the Cambodian genocide, the Khmer Rouge would have never even existed if not for the secret bombings and invasions. And this is what happens, right? This should sober anyone up in the ruling class. It's just like you're engaging in these massive bombings of Palestinian civilians, and that's what was done to the Cambodians, and you helped to create this totally just off the rails Maoist insurgency that takes power and starts to kill its population through starvation and disease and firing squad. So that East Timor, he also played a role in the Guatemalan genocide by enabling the generals. But the thing is, so look, you have the invasion of Cambodia, and you get this huge student backlash in response, right? With Kent State, the killings at Kent State, the killings of Jackson State, hundreds of universities shut down for the rest of the year in 1970 as a result, and that generation was completely radicalized. dehumanized. To this day, the students who participated in this movement, like I can tell they're obviously well in their 70s at this point. Like if they graduated in 72 or 73, they're like about 72, 73 years old now. But when I meet them, if they were politically on the left now, they are still on the left. But then there was the Christmas bombings, and I've been talking about the Christmas bombings of Hanoi, which I think that was 72. Is that? I think that's 72, right? Because and that is, to this day, there's still a kind of narrative of like, oh, the U.S. bombed North Vietnam back to the peace table. Bullshit. First of all, the U.S., it appears, are the ones who broke off negotiations. The deal that was eventually signed in January of 1973 was virtually the same that had been on the table before. But what's interesting is what no one talks about is that Air Force pilots rebelled because they did not, because something like, I think, 30 planes were shot down in 3 weeks. They were losing so many planes. They were like, they did not want to be the last ones to die or to wind up as prisoners of war for what was a failed war. And you got to understand, Air Force pilots are the elite of the elite in terms of the U.S. military. They're the most gung ho, the most nationalistic, and they rebelled. That's what led to the end of the Christmas bombings, right? So 73, Kissinger and Lee Duc-to are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Two members of the five-person commission resign in protest because it's appalling. Lee Duc-to refuses to accept the Peace Prize because he says there isn't peace in Vietnam yet. 74, Nixon resigns in disgrace, and basically, then what you get after that is the church committee hearings in 75. You get Phil Agee and others who are turning the CIA agent who blew the cover on the CIA's assassinations. And this is the nadir of empire, the mid 1970s. The US was never weaker or more constrained in the post World War II period. And then in 76, Kissinger is out of office, right? And so we have to remember that organizing in response to these atrocities can actually have a significant positive effect in terms of not just ending the atrocities, but actually constraining empire to a degree. And so, what is going now on with the Gaza war? It is absolutely disgusting. Biden is vile, but I have never seen a more militant, principled, or strategic anti-war movement in my life than this movement, led by young Palestinians and Jews and Muslims that are just in the streets day after day and doing these creative actions. And so the thing is, like, Biden's terrible, but Trump will be an absolute nightmare, right? He'll be rounding up these protesters and putting them in jail or putting them in internment camps. And I'm going to keep saying this, and I know I'm going to get shit for it. Next year, Trump needs to be defeated. Don't look at your vote as a vote for Genocide Joe. Look at it as a vote to stop Cheeto Hitler from coming to power. Because I think one of the best definitions of fascism is colonialism brought home. So if Trump gets into power, we are going to see concentration camps inside the U.S. We're going to see mass roundups. We're going to see Trump is going to pardon all the January 6th vigilantes, which is going to give a signal to the fascists that they can start to go out and kill queer people, kill trans people, kill black people, kill immigrants, and they'll get away with it. So, as bad as things are now, it will be much worse after Trump. And finally, it's just like, look, we're trying to defeat the most powerful and vicious um, uh, institution in human history, the U.S. government. And did you think it was going to be that easy? Right. So it's not surprising that you know uh, Joe Biden is embracing Israeli genocide. We need to defeat it. But I think the lesson to take away from the Kissinger years is that organizing and outrage combined can actually really put some stops on the power of this just planet killing, society killing war machine that is the United States of America. And we need to keep our eyes on the prize and not act out of rage and not be nihilists.
Couldn't agree more. Arun Gupta has been with us today. As always, you got to follow all of Arun's work. Arun is a regular on CounterPunch, and of course, his food column for Dissent, Apocalypse Chow, also the title of his forthcoming book. Subscribe to his Substack, arunnews.substack.com. Follow him on Twitter, X, whatever the hell it is now. Arun Indy. Arun Gupta is the best. Arun's the man. Thanks, Arun. Love you.
Thank you.
Listeners, thank you as always. Talk to you again next time.